Headmaster of Richard Hale School. On behalf of my fellow Hertford head teachers, Alison Saunders, Simon Ball and Nick Bind of Seal, we would like to welcome you. We are delighted to combine our three schools to host this important community event on behalf of SACRA, the Hertfordshire Standing Advisory Council on Religious Education. It's wonderful to see so many representatives here from Hertfordshire and from other local schools who are taking part in this commemoration. We also have a number of invited guests, including the Lord Lieutenant of Hertfordshire, the Deputy Lieutenant of Hertfordshire, the High Sheriff of Hertfordshire, the Mayor of Hertford, and members of Hertford Constabulary, and a number of town and county councillors. And I hope you'll forgive me for not mentioning you all by name. And can I ask at this point that you turn off your mobile phones? If you leave them on, they will interfere with the Wi-Fi, I'm told. So phones off, please. And at this point, I can also show you the exits, should we have to evacuate the hall. They're to my right and to my left. The event is being recorded, and we have several official photographers, so we would ask you to refrain from taking photographs, and especially that none are taken during the candle lighting. With your kind permission, the photos will be made available on the Hertfordshire website after this event. Out of respect for the solemnity of this occasion, we ask you not to applaud during the commemoration. Thank you.
Last year, the Hertfordshire SACRA Commemoration was honoured to be chosen to host one of the specially commissioned 70 candles for 70 years. Appointed by the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust and designed by the sculptor Sir Anish Kapoor, this national project marked the significant 70-year anniversary since the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest Nazi death camp and site of mass murder during the Holocaust. In lighting it again this year, we symbolically join in a shared purpose of remembrance with other communities across the UK.
We are privileged this evening to ask our guest speaker, survivor Harry Olmer, who's going to share his testimony with us later, to light a candle which will burn throughout the evening. As it burns and flickers, it will remind us of our responsibility to remember and to reflect on the horrors of the past, to honour those who've survived, and for all the victims of genocide, to commit to ensuring that we don't stand by ever again.
Tonight, we give an opportunity for some of our younger audience members to discover and to learn about one of the most terrible events in human history, the Holocaust. This was the murder of 6 million Jewish people, including 1.5 million children, by the Nazis and their many supporters. It happened in the centre of Europe when Hitler came to power in 1933 until 1945, when the Second World War ended, and it took many forms. Although the Nazis wanted to destroy every Jew, many other innocent people who they didn't like also suffered, including Roma and Sinti, people with disabilities, Polish and Soviet prisoners. Homosexuals, religious opponents, and others were killed in vast numbers. We encourage all of our audience to create a valuable link with history and today's issues of racism, discrimination and persecution, and to take action to prevent it.
The UK government designated the 27th of January a national annual Holocaust Memorial Day, the date in 1945 when the horrors of Auschwitz-Birkenau became known to the world. Though today Auschwitz symbolically represents the Holocaust, it only played a part in the unthinkable scope and breadth of mass murder of people, communities and cultures across Europe. The national commemoration was proposed with three aims: to commemorate the Holocaust and all the victims of Nazi persecution, to reflect on more recent genocides in Cambodia, Bosnia, Rwanda, and the ongoing situation in Darfur, and to renew the commitment of British people to combat racism, anti-Semitism and xenophobia, and to work for a caring and open society.
Don't Stand By is the theme for Holocaust Memorial Day 2016, a timely reminder that while some actively supported policies of persecution, the vast majority were bystanders. These were local populations who looked the other way. They stood by silently, allowing discrimination and insidious acts to take place. At best, afraid to speak out. At worst, indifferent. The theme pays tribute to the extraordinary acts of kindness and bravery of the rescuers and resistors who challenged this, ensuring lives were saved. We will hear from the lost and stolen voices, and those who survived the unimaginable, terrible times, through music, film, drama, dance, and through personal stories.
When the Nazis came to power in 1933, few could have predicted how the world would look by 1945. What developed from victimization, forced labor, ghettoization, and mass murder on an unprecedented scale began slowly for the Jewish population of Europe. Carried out by Nazis and ordinary people, the dehumanization process began with the gradual removal of their property, their rights, and their freedom. Soon, their world started changing in threatening and frightening ways. Still, in those dark times, heroes emerged to help others. They have stories which must be heard. Because of their courage, these heroes will never be truly gone. They will never be silent.
When someone says the word Holocaust, what do you think of?
Misunderstanding, innocence, horrific, unheard, Jews,
disgust, death,
fear, robbed, suffering,
view, reality,
remember, tragedy, gas, different,
killing,
family, destruction, opinions, inhumane, misunderstanding, innocence, horrific, unheard, Jews,
disgust, death,
fear, robbed, suffering,
view, reality,
remember, tragedy, gas, different,
killing,
family, destruction, opinions, inhumane, misunderstanding, innocence, horrific, unheard, Jews,
disgust, death,
fear, robbed, suffering,
view, reality,
remember, gas, tragedy, different,
killing,
family, destruction, opinions.
My thoughts and opinions on the Holocaust is that it was a tragic event which really didn't happen that long ago. But I guess the hardest thing must have been the Jews being harshly persecuted, but being guilty of no crime.
Max Colby. During the Holocaust, one Jew escaped Auschwitz, so 10 were punished.
No, take me instead. If you survive this today, you must tell the world what happened. You must tell the world what happened.
What comes to mind when you think of the Holocaust?
Well, disastrous times really for a family. I was born in 1938 and my father served as a Navy officer during the war, so we saw very little of him. And when my sister was born, she didn't see her father until she was 5 years old. And although it didn't affect me personally because I was too young, it did have a dramatic effect on my family and many other families. Money was short, food was short, and it was a struggle to bring up a family. Fortunately, it was a happy ending, and I hope we never have to live through those times again.
When someone says the word Holocaust, what do you think of?
Friendship. Survivors.
United.
Anne Frank.
Liev Schreiber.
Sophia Skipworth.
Courage. Bravery. My great-granddad.
Schindler.
Michael Kurtz.
Max Colville. Determination.
Sacrifice.
Ernie Lobet. Alliances. Justice.
Hope.
Dennis Avey.
Strength.
Heroes.
Heroes.
Sometimes words are limiting. When victims of genocide attempt to express the inexpressible, art is a powerful tool, a testimony on canvas. It is a deeply personal and revealing response.
Some artists created in hiding, in ghettos or in camps. Under these difficult conditions, many paid for it with their lives. Others used art to transmit their experiences of liberation and rescue. For many, it captured their ongoing legacy of loss.
Our contribution is inspired by Holocaust survivor and artist Samuel Bach. Bach was born in 1933 in Vilna, Poland, at a crucial moment in modern history. At 9 years old, he and his family were forcibly moved into a ghetto, one of hundreds specifically selected areas across Eastern Europe where Jews were segregated, starved, and subjected to a reign of terror. Conditions were appalling. Here his artistic talent was first recognized. It was a form of cultural resistance to the Nazis. When the deportations began, he was smuggled out.
Eventually hidden in a Benedictine convent, both he and his mother survived the Holocaust. His father and 4 grandparents all perished. Samuel went on to become a prolific and acclaimed artist across the world. Bach said of his art, "I know that what I have been painting comes from a compulsive need to give meaning to the miraculous fact of my survival. It tries to appease a sad sense of bewilderment. It comes from the fear that, in a world of unparalleled upheavals, things are never what they seem. My work reveals a reality observed through the eyes of a child who had suddenly aged. Some might call it an elaboration of trauma. I hope that my art is more than that. It is not Bach who chose the Holocaust. It is rather the Holocaust has put on Bach's shoulders a very distinct, almost inescapable need to give testimony."
We know full well there's just time. So is it wrong to dance this line? If your heart was full of love, could you give it up? 'Cause what about angels? They will come, they will go and make us special. Don't give me up. Don't give me up. How unfair, it's just our love. Found something real that's out of touch. But if you'd search the whole wide world, day to let it go. 'Cause what about angels? They will come, they will go make us special. Don't give me up. Don't give me up. 'Cause what about angels? They will come, they will go make us special. It's not about angels, angels.
As the Nazis' war machine swept across Europe, bringing with it the full force of death and destruction to those they considered inferior, most found themselves powerless to oppose them. But there remained glimmers of humanity's potential for goodness. Despite the betrayal or indifference of most Europeans, individuals in every country risked their own and families' lives to help rescue Jews and other targeted minorities. Rescue efforts ranged from the isolated actions of individuals to organised networks, both small and large. One extraordinary example of immense courage emerged out of Denmark, who became, in an audacious and unprecedented operation, an entire nation of rescuers.
In September 1943, when the country's resistance movement learned that the Nazis intended to deport the Jews to their deaths, it organised their passage to neutral Sweden in an improvised flotilla of fishing boats, rowing boats, and even rickety canoes. As the Nazis went from house to house, they found no Jews. All had vanished, having been warned of the impending roundup. Almost 8,000 Jews had been hidden by members of the Danish underground and ordinary citizens of Denmark. During the nights over the next 3 weeks, Danish fishermen were paid to transport the Jews across the water to the safety of Sweden. Almost 600 trips were made, and, due to the remarkable courage and resolve of the Danish community, almost all of the Danish Jews survived the war. One moonless night, the town citizens stood in their doorways and whispered directions to the harbour.
Mother, Father, I need to... Annette, my daughter, Annette, are you okay? We heard what happened to Nan's shop. Is everyone okay? Yes, Mother, everyone's fine.
Do they know? The Nazis, girl! Do they know?
No, Father, no one said a word.
Good. I'm glad you're safe, Annette. We can't be too careless.
It's too early. Too early for who? Kind Mother, are they safe?
When the full horror of the Holocaust became known to the world in 1944, the world said never again. But the truth is, genocides have happened again and again. 50 years after the end of the Holocaust, an act of genocide took place in the Bosnian town of Srebrenica. Propaganda and persecution tore communities apart, and 8,000 Muslim men and boys were massacred by the Bosnian Serb army whilst the world stood by. In April 1994, the small Central African country of Rwanda erupted into violence and bloodshed on an unimaginable scale. Over 100 days, nearly 1 million Rwandans were killed in acts of ethnic cleansing as Hutu neighbours turned against their Tutsi and moderate Hutu friends. The despair and hopelessness felt by refugees of genocide in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur transcends the decades. But the power of the actions taken by the individuals to save lives can be a formidable force.
I can't believe it's taken a dead child to wash upon our shore for the world to wake up and realise that things must change.
Must change.
Must change.
Must change.
My name is Safa. I'm a Bosnian Muslim and survivor of the ethnic cleansing in Prešov, Bosnia.
My name is Claire. I'm a survivor of the Rwandan genocide. I was married to Lionel. Our children were killed in the genocide.
My name is Sue. I was born between 1950 and 1951 in Cambodia. When the Vietnamese invaded in 1979, my family and I fled to Thailand. On the way there, we were robbed 4 times.
I am a survivor and a refugee, and now I never.
Right! All of you, get in line! Now! Get your papers out!
I can't believe these kinds of inhumanities have been happening for hundreds of years, and yet we do nothing about it.
May 92. Soldiers came round that day with guns. There were tanks on the main roads. They said all men must come with us. You'll be questioned. My brother and my father went with them. I was 16 at the time and I was going to go with them. My mum said, no please, you stay at home.
On the 11th of April, the killings began. I was captured, tortured, and badly beaten. On the 3rd of May with my son, the Hutu paramilitary took us to a pit by the roadside to be killed. There was a big bang, and I lost consciousness.
We had nothing but the clothes on our backs. We were without food for a month, and we slept on the ground until the Red Cross came to our rescue.
I saw what was happening to the parents and neighbours. Their children were taken, forced to join the fighting.
Two big bangs went off one after the other. My neighbour, who was at home at the time, was a Serb and was in the Serbian army. He said, don't worry, he was a friend. And even though that he was a war criminal to other people, they're not all the same. You have to remember that. They're not all the same. If they were, my father always used to say, we'd all be dead.
I called out for help and someone answered. He kept encouraging me to feel my way around the pit with my injured hand. By shining his torch, he was able to guide me to the steps of the pit. He said that when I reached the surface, he and another man would help me pull me out of the pit. They then devised a plan to tie a rope around my chest and then attached it to my good arm. In this way, I was able to escape from the pit.
We left them alone so no one could see us. We don't carry anything, and the children could not move us to the
composition was written by students from Richard Hale School. The first movements were played at the start of the Commemoration. Each is an original piece that has been inspired by the recollections of our guest speaker. In the midst of appalling conditions, knowing that the Nazis could not destroy what was in people's souls, music provided Harry the sense of hope to survive.
Based on the premise that hearing is not like seeing, the Holocaust Educational Trust works with students across the UK to raise awareness and understanding of the Holocaust and its contemporary relevance. A key role in teaching the universal lessons of the Holocaust is through their lessons from the Auschwitz programme, where selected students make a one-day visit to the site of the former death camp in Poland. Tasked with the role to transmit their learning, our ambassadors will share their reflections.
In early March of last year, Ruben, Mr. Davies and I took part in the government-funded Lessons from Auschwitz scheme. The scheme involved a trip to Auschwitz-Birkenau and Auschwitz I, in addition to orientation and follow-up seminars. In the seminar, we listened to the Holocaust survivor Ziggy Schipper. We also voiced our expectations prior to the trip, and also shared our reflections afterwards, informally with family and friends, and formally in our school assemblies and school magazines. Now, in our first seminar, we looked at some simple facts and statistics regarding the Holocaust, such as Auschwitz holding a death toll of an estimated 1.1 million. I didn't understand the true horror of this statistic until I saw the camps for myself. Auschwitz I almost seemed like a small town, save for the barbed wire and the guard posts. It was truly unsettling to think of what this place would be like if the outside was filled with its captives. But it was the artefacts in the room that truly affected me, with each shoe and hair comb giving me a small detail about the owner's personality. Children, teenagers, parents and the elderly, all were transported to these sites, all suffering at the hands of prejudice, all because they were part of something that the Nazi regime hated. And it was when I saw Auschwitz-Birkenau, the monstrous size, the cattle trucks used for human transportation, the shacks used for housing, that I truly understood the brutality of the Holocaust. 1.1 million lost their lives at this site, each with hopes, aspirations, accomplishments. Now, it's really disturbing to think that this 1.1 million was subjugated to this treatment due to their race, religion, skin tone, belief, sexual preference. And it's also equally disturbing to think that people chose to do nothing in the face of this genocide. And it makes you wonder, by simply deciding not to remain idle in the face of this monstrosity, how many lives could have been saved? So let us learn from Auschwitz. Let's take action. Do not stand by.
Empty, secluded and dormant. The only words I could use to describe the feeling that went through me as we entered Auschwitz-Birkenau. The image that I'd seen many times in lessons and in school was right there in front of me. Reality had hit me, and I was the closest I was ever going to be to understanding the catastrophic events that happened there. Although we're here to remember and never forget the slaughter of so many innocent Jews, I find it difficult to ever understand the amount of life that was actually lost. The numbers are simply too vast to comprehend. I was recently introduced to a word, sonder, the realization that each passerby and every person sitting next to you has a life just as complex and as vivid as your own. I began to think to myself about how complex my life is in my head, about how I'm going to pass my exams, when my next time I'm going to clean my room is, which friends I'm going to see on the weekend. I put this into perspective and begin to understand that every single victim of the Holocaust had the same intelligent, high-functioning mind, one that understood the others around them, one that wanted to do amazing things and care and help for one another. And that was all taken away from them. It made me feel so cold inside. I lived my life on the principle of having a desire and being able to strive for it. Yet for them, every last bit of aspiration was ripped from their very souls. I used my reflective time of the visit as an opportunity to put myself in the position of a Jewish person who had been condemned to one of the many concentration or death camps. I struggled to gain a reaction from myself. What was it like being Jewish during the Holocaust? They already knew that they were not thought of as humans by the Nazis. Had they already come to the realization that their lives were never going to be the same again? But what about if I pretended not to be Jewish? Would they let me live? The complications were endless, and eventually I concluded that although we might not understand what life was like for the Jewish people during the Holocaust, what we can do is educate one another for generations to come to make sure other tragedies don't continue to occur. To teach them that love should be spread between all races, religions and genders, and that we are different in appearance, but identical in the equality, care and respect that we all show to one another. I would like to thank the Holocaust Educational Trust again for giving Darren and I such an eye-opening and profound opportunity. Thank you for listening.
The Holocaust is a human tragedy that's been remembered because of the stories of those who lived it. We are the last generation to hear a survivor speak, as the echoes of their stories slip from living memory to recorded history. It was the Nazis' intention to ensure there were no witnesses to their crimes. Therefore, it is a duty and privilege for each one of us to hear the unique personal testimony of Harry Olmer.
Thank you for coming to speak to us today, and it's a real pleasure to be interviewing you. So let's go back to your life before you came to the UK. Can you start by telling me when and where you were born, and a little bit about your family?
I was born in Poland, in Sosnowiec, the southwest of Poland, in 1927. A family of 6 children. I had 2 older sisters, I had an older brother, and 2 younger sisters. And that was the family, actually, I was immediate family.
Sounds like you were very happy. Were you all close?
We were a very happy family, of course. And it was a large Jewish community, of course, so the Sosnowiec had about a population of about 130,000, and about 30,000 Jewish people living in the town.
So at the time, did you know about Nazism in Germany?
We did know an awful lot because we were living very near the German border, and we could hear the radios from more or less when they were broadcasting for not only for the German population, but also for the immediate Polish population as well. There are a lot of Germans actually living in our town as well. It used to be a part of the Germany before the First World War.
How religious was your family?
We were a traditional Jewish family. We didn't go to synagogue every day, but we said our prayers every day. And on the weekends, we used to go to the synagogue for the prayers, over the holidays as well.
So how soon after the announcement of World War II, how were your family affected?
We were affected more or less immediately because the war started on the 1st of September, and we were very near the border. And even by the beginning, halfway through the day of the first and the Friday, an awful lot of the Polish soldiers were already retreating from the front, and they were walking through our town, completely disorganized, in 1s or 2s. And one of the soldiers actually stood there's an alleyway between our 2 houses, and a German plane was flying overhead, and he really was so terribly frustrated. He started shooting at the plane, actually, with an ordinary rifle.
So you moved to your grandmother's house in the countryside. How long did you stay there?
Well, by Sunday, immediately after the war broke out, we decided that we should leave the town and make our way down to where my grandmother lived. And of course, we were on the train for about half an hour, and the German planes came overhead and they bombed the train. And fortunately, we managed to get off the train and we made our way to our grandmother's place. And it took us 4 days to get there. And we stayed at my grandmother's place actually for about 6 weeks. But before then, actually, while we were, just as we were approaching my grandmother's house, my father decided that the family should split. So my mother, my older sister, and my brother went ahead to see what it was like actually in the place where my grandmother lived. And then while they were away, the Germans actually came into that village where we were staying, and my father just instinctively got hold of my 2 young sisters, and we were running away into the field, and the Germans started shooting after us. But one of the leaders of that small German group started shouting out that they should stop shooting at their father and children running away.
So then your family decided to move back to your hometown of Sosnowiec. Can you tell me what you were faced with when you returned?
Well, that was after 6 weeks, especially there were the high holidays, the Jewish high holidays then in between, immediately after September. So we stayed over there with my grandmother's place. She was living in like a semi-detached bungalow. Half of the bungalow was occupied by my grandmother, the other half was occupied by the local rabbi. So we stayed in there for about 6 weeks. We stayed there. Eventually, after 6 weeks, we decided to go back to our hometown. We left everything behind us, of course, there, And when we got there to our town in Sosnovitz, we found the town was in a terrible state, absolutely horrendous. We just couldn't believe it. Actually, every synagogue and every prayer house was either burnt down or to dynamited or demolished. Lots of people, Jewish people, were expelled from their own homes and occupied by the local German population. It was really horrendous. It really was.
So I understand that you stayed in your father's shop. In the winter of 1939, how did you cope with the difficult conditions?
Well, fortunately, our apartment and the shop, my father actually had a workshop there as well, making actually boots for the Polish, not only soldiers actually, but because they were higher boots for riding boots. And everything was still intact, fortunately. But we stayed there, and although Sosnovitz was a mining town, and steelworks as well, but it was impossible to get any coal, actually, to heat the houses. So it really was a very, very hard time, especially winters came very, very early in 1939, 1940. And we stayed there, of course, over the winter. And towards the end of the winter, we had to start breaking up our furniture in order to start keeping the house warm. And that's how it was. But in the spring, my father decided we should leave the town and make our way back to where my grandmother lived. He came from the town, and he still had two brothers living there together in the same town where my grandmother lived. So we decided to take whatever possessions we had, and we made our way down to where my grandmother lived.
So when you went back to where your grandmother lived, you were forced to work as a slave labourer for the Nazis. What kind of work did you do?
Well, to begin with, of course, we had to find some accommodation as well. 8 of us couldn't go and live in the way we were with my grandmother. Fortunately, we managed to find a very small house, and it was in a big square, lots of houses right around it. And of course, there was no electricity, most of the houses had no electricity actually in those days. No running water. It was very, very primitive, but at least we had, so to speak, a roof over our heads. And we moved into that, but we couldn't accommodate all the family in this small house. So my 2 older sisters, they went to sleep at my grandmother's place, and we had 2 beds, my parents, and then my 2 young sisters were sleeping in another bed, and my brother and I slept on the floor on a mattress. And but at least we had home, and they had to start going out to work immediately. Not only going out to work, but the Germans have made us we had to get new identity papers as well. And my father told us, don't tell them your real age. Tell them you're 2 years older than you actually are. Because you had to be at least 14 before you could get actually any rations as well. And of course, once you're 14, you had to go out and work yourself for the Germans. We worked for the Germans, well, in the summer, of course, it wasn't too difficult. We had to go to repair the roads and plant trees in the forest. But the winters were very, very horrible. Sweep the snow, keep the railway lines clear of snow. And it really was really, really horrendous then in the winter. In the summer, it was all right, actually. We went out into the woods, and we weren't supervised an awful lot there either. I remember one day we went up into the woods, and it was a beautiful day. We were just planting trees there and cutting down some trees as well. And then somebody came out outside the forest and called everybody down to come down back to the town. And we took our time to get down to the town because we knew if we wanted to, obviously going to send us away for some other work. Anyway, once we got down there, the Germans were very, very annoyed because we kept them waiting. And I was hit over the head with a lead-tipped whip over the head. And that was... And then we were just taken away. and we didn't know where we were going. We didn't tell anybody, all the families who were there weren't told as well where we were going. We were just shipped off, not very far, maybe about 15 miles, maybe it was not, I don't think it was more than 15 miles. We went to a brick factory, and the work there was very, very hard. It was summer, and we had to go down into the pits to cut this clay out, carry it up to the main road, load it onto carts, and push it to the factory to be the bricks to be made. And after about 2 weeks, I ran away from the camp. We went to supervise and then made my way back to where we were living. And by the time I got back there, my younger sister, not my older sister, she was taken away already. She was sent to a camp in Krakow. But it was actually the airport in Krakow. She was sent away there. But at least we knew where she was. She could write home from there as well. So she was working in the kitchen. So we were quite relieved that she was actually in a place where she had enough food. And that's how it was until 1942.
So what happens in the next part of your story is very upsetting. Can you tell us about when the notices were put up in your town and selections and transportations began?
Well, again, just on a Friday, I think it was the end of August, notices were pinned up in our town that all the Jewish people have got to assemble in certain places. We are allowed to take just one small suitcase, and we were told to take whatever food we had with us as well, and to go to assembly points. And while we were waiting still in our house, just getting ready more to move out, there was directly opposite us lived an older man, and they had no children, and he had a wife who was blind, and he knew he was not going to go anywhere at all. So he went out to the communal well, which was in the middle of the square, with a bucket and collected some water. And as he was carrying the bucket of water back, the German soldier was standing in the middle of the square, waiting for everybody to leave. And he was eating an apple. We were just watching through the window, and he took the gun out and he shot at men while he was carrying the bucket of water. And we made our ways very, very quickly down to the assembly point. And when we got down there, the first selection was already taking place. And the selection there was only for men. They didn't take any women or children away. They took one of my uncles away, took the rabbi. They took many people, many men away, and they loaded them up onto carts and trains and moved them away. We didn't know where they were going. And then when they had that selection, the remaining of the people were again put into carts and trucks, and we moved up in the same direction where the first people, the men, were moved away as well. And as we were approaching a small wood, we could hear an awful lot of shooting going on inside that wood, and we knew what was going on then, that all the people who were sent away earlier on, they were being more or less murdered there. And one of the women actually, who was on our truck, her husband was taken away as well, and she started screaming. She really became hysterical, and the Germans stopped the truck, dragged her down from the truck, and they shot her. So everybody should be quieted down. And then we moved on. We moved on for another 15 miles or thereabouts towards Krakow. And then the convoy, so to speak, turned off the main road onto an open field. And when we got onto that field, we were the first ones to arrive there. We could see Polish people digging trenches right around the field, and we thought that that's where our end is going to come as well. But gradually more and more people kept arriving onto that field, and those trenches that we saw them being dug actually were used for latrines. Eventually the place was absolutely chock-a-block full. About 2,000 people after 4 days arrived there on that open field. Whatever food we had with us went very molded very quickly. The field was damp, and in the terrible smell, and it was absolutely horrendous. Then on the fourth day, the trains arrived, and then they have no selection. All women and all children, irrespective whether they were old or young, were straight herded into the trains, and it was boiling hot there. We couldn't even say goodbye to anybody at all. We were really just rushed into the trains as quickly as possible. And then there was a selection of the men. The men had to walk past the Germans, and they examined the wrists of the palms of our hands to see whether we had calluses on our hands. And if they thought that we did some physical work, they would put us to one side, and the others who they assumed were not fit enough, they were rushed into the same trains as the women and the children were. And then the train moved away, and we didn't know where they were going, of course. And then another train arrived, and those who remained actually on that field, we were loaded onto the train, and we moved away. And our train didn't go very, very far. We only traveled for about maybe 15, 20 miles maximum. And we arrived in the first concentration camp, and that was Plaszow. And that was in Plaszow, actually. We arrived there. And
so what kind of work and food were you given when you went to the Plaszow camp?
when we got there, of course, the following morning, of course, we started going work straight away. And we were building a railway embankment. And obviously we all went to work, actually. My father, my brother, and I, and all the other men, of course, as well. And I still remember the name of the company that was building that embankment. I remember there was big notices up that Hochtief, which is a big multinational company with offices here in this country, even now as well, and Siemens as well. And they were, obviously Siemens was doing the signaling work on that embankment, but that type of work we did. And then my father told us he's going to run away, and because my younger sister, when the selection was taking place, so she was in the hospital then, she had very bad earache, and he wanted to know what happened to her, so he ran away. We ran away from the camp, and then 2 days later my older brother ran away as well. At the time, actually, it wasn't, the camp wasn't there very well guarded, not only the camp, but as we were walking, actually, to work, the people weren't or rather the Germans were terribly observant, or didn't particularly care whether anybody was running away. It was still easy to run away. We still wore our normal clothing, so it wasn't terribly difficult to run away. But that's what we did. And then about a week later, as I was walking back from work, a man called out my name. He was walking more or less parallel with all the group actually was walking there, because he didn't know me and I didn't know him. And I looked around, he came over to me, took me by the hand, we walked away, and the Germans just either didn't see us or maybe just didn't. Anyway, I was lucky taken away. And I was taken back to my father was, my brother was there in the home, the same place where we came from, because my father's younger brother was left behind by the Germans, clearing out the empty houses. So he found sick people, some very younger, fit people they left behind there to clear up the houses. So we were all there together for a few days.
So eventually, you were caught and taken back to Plaszow. What was it like going back there?
Well, I was taken back to Plaszow, but not my brother. My brother wasn't sent back to Plaszow. I didn't know then, of course, where he was sent to. But I was sent back to Plaszow to exactly the same camp as I was. And of course, I was there all by myself, except I found later on, while I was in there, that I had some 3 cousins there as well, who were my mother's family. And so at least I had somebody there. But the conditions there in Plaszow deteriorated terribly, very, very quickly. we had to go out to work every day. It was only day shifts. And we worked 12 hours a day. The food we got was only just in the evening. We got, when we got back from work, we got a lump of bread and we got a plate full of cabbage soup. And that's all the rations we had for 24 hours. We had to make sure that we leave some of the bread that we got in the evening for the following day when we went out to work. And that's the type of work it was. But the sleeping accommodation, that was even worse. We hadn't individual bunks. We were just on platforms. We were sleeping 3 up, you know. And I was sleeping next to man, I don't think he was more than about 20, 25 years old, but he was a choir master of the large synagogue, Jewish synagogue in Krakow. He was also a member of the opera house in Krakow. And we were lying next to one another. And he was humming and singing actually some songs he used to remember. And I remember one particular song I never heard before. It was the song The Trout by Schubert, and every time I can hear it, even now, it just gets goose pimples on me. But the showers, of course, were just cold showers. We could go to have the cold showers, but sleeping, they were infected with the lice and bed bugs. It was absolutely horrendous. One night, I just couldn't stand it any longer. I got up from my bunk bed, I went down to the showers, switched the lights on, it was in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden as I was having the shower, the doors burst open and the Germans came rushing in. He was always walking, the leader with 2 Alsatian dogs, and he had some Jewish policemen walking behind him as well. And I thought he's going to let the dogs loose on me. But fortunately, he was just taken aback as well to see somebody actually having a shower. So he turned round to the other people who were behind him, and he told them, "Das ist Sauberkeit." That is cleanliness. And they walked out. And I didn't go back to repeat that exercise any other time at all. It really was absolutely horrendous then. And then, of course, the typhus broke out, the typhus epidemic. And unfortunately, I was taken ill as well. And we were put into a hut where all the people who were infected with typhus, and all the medication we got was plenty of water to drink. And the Jewish doctors, of course, who were supervising us there as well. And one day, I had a note sent in to that hospital that I should get dressed and sit by the window. And then when the doctor came and asked me why I'm sitting by the window, I showed him the note that I got from my cousins, and he let me sit there, and I sat there for the rest of the day, because apparently that particular day the Germans were deciding whether they should take all the people who were infected with the typhus and eliminate them, but they were persuaded to say that the infection is subsiding, so we let us actually stay there.
So in October 1943, you were then transported to a munitions factory in Sarzysko-Kamina in northern Poland, which was run by the Ukrainian police. You say this was the worst experience of your life. Can you briefly tell us what you remember from your arrival there?
Well, when we arrived there, there were 3 factories, the A, B, and C. And I was in the factory C, and as we arrived, just outside the gates of the factory, it was absolutely horrendous. Everything actually was tasted bitter in the mouth. And we looked through the gates, and we could see everything there was yellow. The people were yellow, the trees were yellow, everything absolutely was yellow. And the people walking around, they were just like skeletons as well. And they were still wearing their ordinary clothes. They didn't have the striped uniforms, but it was absolutely horrendous. And I was sent to a hut there, where I was going to stay there, and I stayed actually there. But when I got to that hut, everything was, the smell was unbearable. And I asked them, what is the terrible smell here? And they pointed out to a box which is outstanding just a few yards away, next to the washroom. And it says all the people who died during the week, they're being put into that box. And then once a week, a truck comes along, takes the bodies away. And that's what the smell was like. It was absolutely horrendous. And the work, of course, I was put on to work there. Well, the people, everything was yellow there. Some of the work that was being done, there was making mines, land mines, and the sea mines as well. And that was the picric acid. We used to work on picrine. And there used to be some other places where they were filling actually the normal shells with explosives, with TNT, with trottle. But I was put to work actually on the picrine. And that was the most horrible, terrible work you can possibly imagine. People there working for that didn't survive more than maximum about 2 months. No protective clothing. The clothing that you were wearing actually it got hard. We couldn't wash it because the picric acid actually was solidifying on the clothing, and it was absolutely horrendous, really horrendous. That was the work I did.
So in April 1944, you must have heard the Russian artillery and thought you were being liberated. But you were sent on a cattle truck to Buchenwald concentration camp, working in a quarry. But what was life like there?
Well, I just to tell you a little bit more of what happened too. And before while we were still in Skarżysko, in the munition factory, we thought we were going to be liberated. We thought because we could hear the German artillery and the Russian artillery fighting out actually Jews already in Poland. And we really gradually, the artillery Jews, the shells, we could hear it much more clearly. But then they stopped. Obviously the Russians stopped and they moved somewhere else. So they evacuated half the camp, and the other half camp was still there. And I was left to be evacuated the second time. And I arrived, and the place I was sent to was Buchenwald concentration camp in Germany. And at least when we got there, we got cleaned up. We got striped uniforms, and we got clogs to wear on our feet, because all the clothes that we had was still the clothes that came in 1942 with all the hard work we did. So it really was absolutely tatters, and it was really infected with the lice, and it was absolutely horrible. But in Buchenwald we were cleaned up. We got the striped uniforms, we were clean, so it was much better then.
So then 2 months later, you moved to another munitions factory, Schlieben, for some months. In October 1944, you got out of the camp when it was blown up. What happened?
Well, in 1944, there was a big explosion. The factory blew up. I was on day shift, fortunately, because all the night shift who were there were killed. And the explosions, it was unbelievable. They were going on all night. And not only was the camp destroyed, but even the town Schlieben itself actually was destroyed as well, but all those explosions from the munitions exploding. But we managed to run out of the camp and got into a field, escaped from the falling buildings. But in the morning, after it subsided, we had to make our way back into the camp. And then the real terrible work started. It was, the assessment came in, not Germans, they were Ukrainians and Latvians, and they were the most cruel people you could possibly imagine. It was, we had to start clearing the site where it was, everything was destroyed in the factory. Move the railway lines actually from one place to another. They wouldn't let us actually dismantle the rails from the sleepers. We had to carry whole sections of the railways actually from one place to another to assemble it again. And eventually they poured another concrete slab and put up the boilers. And fortunately, I was put back on to do my normal work. I was working in the Gießerei, means filling up the bombs. The bombs, we used to make them in Schlieben, was purely defensive, one called the Panzerfaust. And so we were back to filling our back to normal work, and so it was very much better. Of course, all the people who were killed in the explosion, they had to be replaced as well. But they couldn't. There were no more Jewish people actually living in Poland, not Polish Jewish people. But then, of course, the Hungarian Jews were taken away from Hungary and sent to Auschwitz, and all the people who were replaced, who were killed in the explosion, they were Hungarian Jews. And that's how we were there.
So somehow you survived, and then in April 1945, the camp was evacuated. You were moved in open cattle truck trains. What happened to you then, and how did you end up being liberated in Terezin concentration camp?
Well, again, the camp was split again. First of all, a lot of people were evacuated from the camp, and then another one. But we knew that the war was coming to an end, because especially the night shifts were very, very easy, because the lights had to be kept off, switched off. So we knew that the British planes were flying overnight, and the Americans during the day, every day and every night. And Schlieben was about equidistant from about 80 kilometers from Berlin, and the same distance from Leipzig and Dresden. Every time those cities were being bombed, you could see the sky actually red and blowing like anything. It really was exhilarating for us to see that something like this is going to come. Anyway, we were evacuated as well. And of course, the trains were going backwards and forwards, and it took them an awful long time because the rails were bombed as well. And one day we actually parked, our train was parked parallel with another train, and somebody found out that the train parallel with ours had some provisions on it. So everybody scrambled off from our train onto the other train, I got into a train on a wagon full of oats. I tied my trousers at the bottom of the trousers, and I stuffed the oats down into my trousers, and went back onto the train from which we came. Eventually, the train moved off, and we moved into Theresienstadt. And there I found my friend who was working with me, and he was evacuated 2 weeks before me, and he was sitting on the ground there, and was actually starving, like everybody else. So we made a small fire, and everybody had a tin plate, and we roasted those oats, and we ate the kernels. But and then I was sent into a hut as well. And by the 5th of May, 1945, the Red Cross took over the whole camp. They put the flags right around the camp, but still didn't get any extra food at all. Germans were still outside having pot shots into the camp. And on the 8th of May, the Russian tanks actually broke through the gates and they came into the camp. Well, that was the 8th of May, the last day of the war. Everybody rushed out, and I managed to drag myself down again through the gate onto the main road. But I was very, very ill by then. I went back into the camp and lay down into my bunk bed, and that's the only thing I remembered for an awful long time. I don't know. Obviously, the people found me there. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. But I couldn't talk, and my whole body was in a spasm at the time. I don't know how long I stayed there, and then that friend of mine with whom I shared the oats, he came looking for me. And he found me there. He sat next to my bed. I still couldn't talk. But the nurse came over and he asked him what was my name. So he told her. And then the nurse bent over me, and she asked me, but I've got a sister called Sarah. And I shook my head. And she said, I'm sure she's alive. I was with her in a camp in Austria until about 6 weeks before I came here to Theresienstadt, and I'm sure she was alive. Anyway, she started looking after me just like her own sister, like her own brother, and obviously I made the recovery. But then, while I was sick, all the people, the young people in Therese, that they were put on a list because the British government gave a permission for the youngsters to come to England. Well, I don't particularly care, but I go to England. I didn't have any connections with England, but anyway, the nurse said, "Anyway, you're not on the list anyway." Eventually, she came in. She said, "Well, you will go to England, but not in your own name." He said, "One of the boys who is on the list, he has found that his father was alive in Poland, so he decided to go back to Poland." And that's how I came to England on an assumed name, and I came under the name of Ephraim Mintzberg. Anyway, that's how I came to England.
So in those first weeks in Windermere, when you were recuperating, what was going through your mind, and how did you acclimatise to life in the UK?
Oh, it's impossible actually to describe the condition, our elation, so to speak, by getting rid of all the clothes that we had on, and go to the dining room. We had bread on the table. We just couldn't believe it. It was unbelievable. White bread. We haven't seen white bread for years, and as we and the accommodation was fantastic as well. Everybody had a small room because the Windermere camp was occupied by workers, British workers, who were building the flying boats on the Lake Windermere, and that's how we went. That's how we were. But we started learning English again. It was absolutely fantastic. Eventually, the camp was being people were sent away from the camp to various cities, to hostels that were set up in all cities in London and Manchester and all over the place. And I was sent up to Scotland with the last 27 of us who still needed recuperation. They were sent to Scotland.
Did you ever find out what happened to your father and mother, your grandmother and your sisters?
Well, I found out, first of all, I didn't find out anything what happened to my father, although my father went into hiding, where he deposited all our goods that we brought back from our home on a farm, and so we deposited our goods there, and we arranged for all of us to go down actually into hiding, but of course it was the notices about assembling in the village took very, very quickly, so we couldn't go down. But my father, when he ran away, took my young sister away, and she was actually with him in hiding. He arranged for her to have some false documents, and so she would work as a Polish girl, and she went and worked in the kitchen together with my older sister in Krakow airport. And so at least I didn't know anything about it, of course, until after the war. But one day, for my sister who wasn't there, she was working there in the kitchen, but one day my sister didn't come back at all. She must have been picked up by the Germans. So that's how it was when I found out. But what happened to all the people, my mother, my grandmother, my sisters, all the family actually who were on that field, what happened to them, we didn't know anything what happened to them until after the war. And even after the war, it was very difficult to find out as well. But eventually we managed to find out that there was a camp, Belzec, and that wasn't a concentration camp, it was an extermination camp. Mm-hmm. Everybody who was sent to that camp was straight away into the gas chambers and killed. And when we got there in 1991, for the first time I went there with my two sons and my daughter-in-law to that camp. We just couldn't find it where it was, first of all. Even we asked people in town there where it was, they wouldn't tell us. And we followed the railway line, and we managed to come to the camp. And we saw it was absolutely horrendous. There was absolutely nothing there. It was just a field, an open field. There were just 6 urns on the side of that field, probably representing the people who were murdered there, because we noted there was a notice up there as well. on that field, on the extermination camp. They said between February 1942 and December 1942, 600,000 Jews were murdered in that place. And but there was nothing there, absolutely nothing. The fields, the dogs were running around it, they started digging up bones. It was absolutely the most horrendous sight you could possibly imagine. It was really terrible. And that's how we found out actually where most of the family actually were destroyed or killed in Belgrade.
It's really terrible. I understand your wife, Margaret, was a Kindertransport child, and you've been married for 61 years now. You have 4 children, 8 grandchildren, and are officially the longest-serving dentist in the UK, having only retired 2 years ago.
That's right.
And now you visit schools, share your testimony as a witness to history. And you've done that with us tonight. And it's remarkable to think, having experienced such tragedy, what you've achieved. So if you could give a message to everyone listening tonight, what would you tell us?
I'll tell you that whatever happened to me, hopefully will never happen again. But unfortunately, genocide is still going on. Maybe not to the same extent as it happened to the Jews in 1939 to 45. But it can happen again. And you've got to be vigilant. And you've got to make sure that you're human. You're humane as well. And don't stand by when you see actually what's happening to the people around you. If you see actually that they're denying that things like this couldn't happen, it didn't happen, you must actually stand up and make sure that you know that it did happen and it could happen again. So you've got to make sure you're humane.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. He continues to tell the story to schools around the UK, and I know it's a particularly painful duty. So thank you for that. And it's our duty to pass on the messages that he's been telling us about this evening, to learn about his story, to tell other people that you have heard the story, and to continue doing good work in schools, and for us to take on our responsibility to make sure we don't let anything like this ever happen again. Thank you. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
We'll now light the memorial candles for the traumas of genocide. After they're lit, we invite you to join us for a moment of silence to remember the deceased and all those affected by racism, discrimination and persecution across the world.
We light this candle in memory of the 6 million Jewish people and all those who perished in the Holocaust as a result of human action. We also remember the extraordinarily brave individuals who protected and rescued at the risk of their own lives.
We light this candle to keep the memory alive and to fire.
We light this candle for the innocent men, women and children who are suffering and displaced in the ongoing conflicts throughout the world. We light this candle as a sign of our determination to dispel darkness wherever we may find it and of our commitment to a safer and better future for all.
So to close, it has been said that the road to Auschwitz was built by hate but paved with indifference. Tonight we have learnt where that indifference has led. The Holocaust and subsequent genocides happened because they were allowed to happen. Too many people were silent. In every case of genocide, and for the millions of ordinary, innocent people whose lives were brutally crushed and stolen, it was preventable. The Holocaust is an unparalleled catastrophe, a moral failure where acts of inconceivable evil and atrocities forever robbed Western culture of its innocence. Holocaust Memorial Day makes us confront the darkest corners of the darkest hours of our human history. It is a warning and a lesson to us all, in all times, to understand not just what happened across Europe, but how this came to happen and why similar terrible events have happened again in places such as we've heard, Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur. Listening to Harry bearing the burden and challenge of survival reminds us that genocide is the story of individual suffering. It also reminds us of the incalculable loss of a talent and promise denied to future generations. These shameful events have shown us the worst of humanity, but they have also shown us some of the best of endeavours and the very strength of human survival. Those who made extraordinary sacrifices to help hide and protect thousands of victims of persecution from certain death. These rescuers showed immense courage and compassion. What is remarkable is that they too were ordinary people, crossing boundaries of faith, age, and ethnicity. With innate decency, they paved our understanding of how humanity can play a role to take action. May we all be inspired and get strength by their example. In these turbulent and challenging times in which we live, it is easy to be overwhelmed by forces outside our control and to assume that we as individuals can do nothing to stop them. And it is particularly poignant at the moment and over the last year when we see so many families crossing Europe, relocating and displaced from their homes, and a significant number of those are unaccompanied children and young people. However, as the history of the Holocaust demonstrates, action can be taken to make a difference. We must look to the future with hope, renewed commitment, and the shared human values that we all hold dear. Each of us must be a compelling voice and challenge ourselves to ensure that we aren't simply standing by.
On behalf of the Hertfordshire Sacre, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all for coming and taking part this evening. Thank you to all our pupils who have represented Hertfordshire schools and to all of you who have helped to prepare their moving contributions. We would like to thank our collaborating 3 schools, Richard Hale, Simon Ball and the Seals School. And we are particularly grateful for the invaluable support of Tom Brownlee, our lead liaison teachers, and all of the school communities who have made this event possible. Our speaker, Harry Olmer, has shared with us his personal testimony, and I'm sure you would all wish to join me in thanking Harry for the privilege of listening to his memories firsthand. Thank you, Harry.
The words, "I believe in the sun, even when it isn't shining. I believe in love, even when we don't feel it. I believe in God, even when he is silent," are 3 lines scratched anonymously into a cellar wall in Cologne, Germany. Believed to have been scrawled by a child hiding from the Nazis in 1943, we share this inscription of hope.